What's up, everyone? We're back. Welcome to Doctorly Unhinged.
I'm Dr. Maxfield.
And I'm Dr. Shaw. And thank you for joining us. We're deep into season 3 now. We had our first guest on last week. Hopefully you all enjoyed James. He's incredible. We love him. And definitely let us know in the comment section if you're watching on YouTube. And I think you can actually leave comments now on Spotify. Let us know who you want to see next. We've been seeing a lot of the same names showing up in the comments, but anyone outside of the box, any scientist, anybody really. We could talk about we could talk to chefs. We can talk to beauty founders. You want us to get the founder of certain brands on the podcast. Just let us know, and we'll get people. It doesn't have to be your favorite YouTube creators. We could try to reach out to pretty much anybody and see if they'll come on. So let us know who you want to see next.
Nice. Yeah, definitely. I'm excited about this. I love hearing different perspectives, learning from different people. And so this is going to be a fun outreach this year from us. I guess first life updates. I feel like a lot's happened. Maybe nothing's happened, but life updates, then we'll do product of the day. And then the other two topics, do you want to intro those? What we'll be talking about?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about tariffs, right? So tariffs, been the big word in the US, very big. And it affects beauty, right? It affects skincare, affects makeup, affects all of us in some ways, right? And there's, of course, pros and cons of tariffs. Now, tariffs are not a new idea. So tariffs have been used and leveraged throughout every presidency ever. But, these particular tariffs affect beauty probably more than ever before. So we're going to talk about how it could potentially affect remedy, and it could also affect just other things that you're purchasing and how in the immediate term it may affect your wallet. Then we're also going to talk about whether or not retinol thins your skin. This is an article coming out of The Guardian. That should be a quick answer for us. And then we've always talked about the medical industry and how medicine is really kind of hanging on by a thread in the United States. But, we're going to be talking about Prospect Medical Holdings filing for bankruptcy. Now, this is the second largest health system, and it's owned by private equity. And we are going to talk about what happened and why they're filing for bankruptcy and what that means if your hospital is now insolvent. What does that mean for your care? So we're kind of living in dangerous times when it comes to healthcare, as we see people are very upset. They're very upset with their insurance plans, as we've seen. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So let's hop into it. What's a life update for you?
Life update. So a quick trip in and out of Bulgaria.
How was Bulgaria? I've never been.
I was actually pretty cool. I was wondering if you had been, and I'll tell you why though. So yeah, Bulgaria was great. People were great. Food was amazing. I spent 36 hours there. It was a whirlwind of a trip. But couldn't be happier. Very thankful for it, and just a huge grand old adventure. I also found out, so while I was on this trip, it was like a music trip as much as anything, because I hate flying. I hate turbulence. I was like already nervous. And
especially with all the plane stuff going on.
Yeah,
right?
What is that? Like that I don't like. So anyway, I got to the point though on this first leg of the flight is like 9 hours, 10 hours in the air. And there's this band, SVRCINA. SVRCINA? I don't know. And then there's another one. What is it? Mun, I think. I'm like got them on a playlist now. But I had this cool experience on the plane where like it was like night. I hadn't slept in quite some time. Turbulence was really bad. And I literally just like threw up my headphones, had these two, like they're very vibey sounds. And I was just like completely vibing out, like praying and like hoping I don't die and just like reflecting for like a solid 10 hours and with like no visual stimulus because I'm like blacked out. It was a really cool experience. Like that was actually a really interesting experience.
Yeah, they call that raw dog in the flight, by the way.
Even with music?
Wait, well, technically you're supposed to have nothing, and then you're like locked in, and it's a trend, and it's a trend that guys do, where they go no stimulus on a plane, which is insane to me. I don't like flying, honestly. Like, not that I'm like afraid of flying, but like even if it's like the best flight, the fanciest flight, you're still like basically in a prison cell for like an extended period of time, right? Like you can't go anywhere. You're in cramped quarters. You're breathing everyone's air. It's not my favorite thing to do. But Bulgaria, that's crazy. No, I've never been. I've been to Poland, which I think is close to Bulgaria, but I could be wrong. And I love that. That was awesome.
Do you remember the picture that CeraVe made of you in front of like the Coliseum? You remember
Yeah.
that? Was that
Yeah.
were you actually in front of a prop or
No,
did
that
they?
was just like in a
So
studio.
that was in Bulgaria, I think, the actual prop. And so I explored. We were in an actual film studio where they made like the Expendables and I think 300 and Conan, an older like with
Oh
that
wow.
Jason guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I know I had some time, so of course I like had an adventure, went and explored all of the sets, took pictures and posed at all of the sets. And when I was looking through my pictures, and I was like, it's me in front of the Coliseum, right? And it's my hands up holding like a product just for fun. It's not sponsored, that part. And I was like, wait a minute, I've seen this picture before. And I was like, wait a minute, this is what Dr. Shaw looked like in the one they made of him. And so I was like, oh, maybe he's been here, but
Nope.
maybe
Nope.
not.
Nope. But no, I have not been. Any other life updates?
That was the biggest thing over the last few weeks that had my attention. No, I think that's it for right now for me.
Okay. Let's see. Life. What's going on? Remedy's launching a new product. We don't know when yet, so it's either next week or the week after. So stay tuned for that. We are entering the hair category. Huge launch for us. We've put a lot of effort into developing this product. We went through probably 50 different versions of this product, and it really truly is groundbreaking innovation. It's just so hard to get this product out. Like because it's I can't. It was specific. It's a little more complicated than the previous products, and so we have to go through a few more stability exercises. And so there's been some delays there because it's just you have to wait longer. So anyway, so stay tuned for that. That's coming out. That's been a big deal for us. That's been kind of the main focus for Remedy, and we have like a new initiative to be like radically better this year, and just everything from packaging to product development to our branding and our creative direction. So hopefully you guys see like kind of like it's not like a rebrand, but just like we had such a great 2024 that 2025 we want to like up the ante essentially. So there's a bunch going on there in the Remedy world. I got a robot vacuum that also mops, and this thing is like phenomenal. This thing is just working overtime cleaning our floors. So that was a big thing that I need to tell people. And I'm wearing the juiciest sweater right now. So Dr. Casal, who runs Script with Dr. Maxfield, he got this in a box, and he's like, "This is the worst sweater I've ever seen in my life." But you know what? It's so comfortable, and this came from Neutrogena, and so a lot of you have been leaving in the comments that you've seen me in this Neutrogena commercial. Yes, I was in a national commercial with Neutrogena and Tate McRae. This is sort of my big on-screen moment, and so yeah, I love when you guys let me know that you saw me in a commercial. I think it's super cool. And yeah, it's first time being on the thing. And Neutrogena is making big waves in product development and their research for this year and beyond. So super excited to discuss some of those things once we're able to. But Neutrogena's got some really cool things headed your way, and I'm excited for you guys to see those changes. Let's jump into our product of the day. What do you got?
So this is from the Minimalist, and the Minimalist is a brand. I actually need to make a whole video about this. Is like this is a brand I can't believe I didn't find sooner. Like this was like a 2024 find for me. Where like really got deep into the weeds with their products. And every product I try, I'm like, oh, this is a good product. Like whether it's a simple product or a little more complex, it's always good. But this is their body wash actually. So the salicylic acid LHA 2% body wash. It's like a gel. But it gives you a good clean. And I think for someone who has some like discoloration or more specifically acne, it would be a really good body cleanser for them. It's super gentle. I like the gel formulation. You know what I did? I started getting ready in the morning at the office. So like I shower here now because all my products are here. And so because of that, like I can try so many more different things, just like doing the complete routine in the shower, like at the office. So
Yeah.
I've got like blow.
That's actually how I try most of my stuff. Like if I put it in the shower, like it's going to get tried.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, very cool. So yeah, Minimalist is very cool. So this brand is from India. And they're like basically because the Ordinary and the Inculus had not launched in India. Now the Ordinary is in India, but at the time there was really nothing. People were importing it, paying triple, quadruple the prices for the Ordinary. So this is kind of like the birth of the Minimalist, and they're doing very well. Now they've launched in the United States. Sort of similar concept, but I actually think the formulas are in some ways more interesting than the ones from the Ordinary. And so we'll do a whole kind of best and worst. This has been like a highly requested video from our YouTube audience. So we will do a full best and the worst of the Minimalist probably next time we shoot. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, they have some really cool products. My product of the day is the oil-based cleanser from Transparent Lab. This company does some of the cool stuff. This is also the same, like they also own Theramid. It's like all under the same umbrella. Transparent Lab and Theramid are like the same company, and Theramid does that 15% azelaic acid. I believe this company is from Spain. No, it's not Spain. It's like somewhere South America, maybe. But they're not US based, but they like
Spain.
ship to the US. They're from Spain. And they have some like
Mhm.
really cool stuff, like, ceramide type things. They have some like really nice cleansers, and just really, really like a cool brand. And packaging is very cool. And it's an oil-based cleanser. It's been really great at removing sunscreen. I will say though, like, and you kind of brought this up once, and it's something I never thought about, but now that you mentioned it, like, I feel like it's consistently true across oil-based cleansers for me. I find that they're more drying. Like, you would think like oil-based cleansers are going to be more hydrating. Something about them are a little bit more stripping than like a traditional cleanser. Cleansing balms don't have that same effect on me. Like cleansing balms, like I feel pretty hydrated afterwards, but it is a bit drying, but it's like a really, really nice cleansing oil overall though. Like, fragrance free, just kind of like nice on the skin. And yeah, I mean, I've kind of loved every product I've tried from this brand.
Yeah, that's a stellar brand. They actually need a little bit more hype. Does it have a lather? Does that one have a lather?
Not really. No, it kind of goes from like a clear to like a white, milky kind of texture when you like rub it in, but it doesn't foam.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah,
oil combination that lathers, I do like that. It's really rare, but nice. Yeah, that brand
yeah.
is on point.
All right, so let's hop into tariffs because you guys have heard the word. How does it affect beauty? How does it affect you? So tariffs are basically taxes the government levies on imported goods. So the US government can put tariffs on anything, meaning like if you were to import, rice from Canada for whatever reason, the US government could say, hey, we're going to charge 10% on that. So how does that work? Who pays that 10%? So technically that is paid by the person importing the good. So the companies that import the good pay the tariff. So let's say that Canada sells a bag of rice for $1. The tariff is 25%. Then the person has to pay a 25% tariff or tax to the US government when they import that $1 good. And now it's $1.25 that they have to pay for it. 25 cents goes to the government, $1 goes to the company in Canada. And then you get the bag of rice the company gets the bag of rice for $1.25, and then they sell it to you for like $5, right? That's kind of how the game works, right? And so anytime a tariff comes on a good, it causes the purchaser to have to pay more for that. So how does a company respond to that? So there's two things that they can really do. One, most companies don't have very large profit margins when everyone is paid, everything's said and done, after all the marketing is paid, after the cost of goods are covered to create the product, distribution, shipping, employees, like, right, when all is said and done, there's not that much profit left in a company, right? Like what's considered a very healthy company, they run about a 20% profit margin, right? So after everybody's paid, they get about 20%. That's very healthy, right? Most companies don't run into that 20% margin, right? So anytime the cost of goods goes up through something like a tariff, the company has to figure out a way to respond because there's not that much meat left for the company to work with in most cases. And so how do they respond to it? There's really two ways that you can respond to a tariff. Is one, you can just increase the prices and pass those prices on to consumers. Okay, so let's say that I get a 25% increase. I could increase my goods by 25% of my cost of goods, pass it on to the consumer. I maintain my profit margins. Things are more expensive for the customer who buys them in the United States. Second option is that I just absorb that cost as a brand because I have a healthy margin, and I can then say, you know what, I'm going to take it. I'm going to get less profit, but I'm going to keep my prices the same. The third option is that you essentially do one of those two options first, and then you try to change where you manufacture. So you decide, well, I'm not going to import from Canada anymore because it's more expensive to get it from Canada. Instead, I'm going to bring it in from Vietnam, where there is no tariff or the tariff is less, and I can then get my cost of goods back to where it was. And so that's essentially, or finally, you manufacture in the United States, which is almost always not the more cost-effective option, but you could theoretically bring the manufacturing into the US. I don't even know that we have enough labor in the US to justify that, but those are the ways that you can respond to tariffs.
Okay, so tariffs sounds So this is the other thing. So tariffs seem to go hand in hand with the idea of inflation, which we've talked about on this as well. So tariffs, inflation has increased costs, and obviously the causes for that were probably a little different than what the increase in cost would be now. And then tariffs, it sounds like just following the logical endpoint, will indirectly create what would be inflation, where the price of goods is more expensive than it was previously. And for all of you, like, what will this impact? Whether it's, I mean, it's really everything. America does so much importing for everything you touch. Like, we saw this during COVID. Like, things you didn't have a clue were not in America. They were not possibly made in America. Like, it all came to light. And so I feel like this is going to impact people across every walk of life, no matter what your interests or hobbies are. For skincare specifically, I know through Script and, through Remedy, like, more than I do, I think, but whether it's ingredient sourcing or whether it's especially packaging, oh my gosh, packaging, like, packaging almost always comes from somewhere else. And so that's going to be a cost that gets passed on. I mean, basically, it's just a new tax. I mean, like, the long and short of it, it's just a tax.
Yeah, it's essentially a tax, right? And I mean, you can leverage tariffs for right. Like, you could say, well, because it also hurts. So it hurts in the immediate term. The first thing that's going to happen, because you can't, like, let's say that you're importing from your goods from China, right? And some of the Remedy products are actually manufactured in Canada, which is actually like, we don't manufacture anything in China. Everything's either made in the US or Canada. And so a 25% Canadian tariff, which is right now on pause, would significantly affect the Remedy business in the immediate term, because it would not be quick for us to change our manufacturer. Like, it would take us at least a year, because we'd have to transfer the formulas over, and then we'd have to transfer them to a lab that then prices them out. It gets the raw ingredients, figures out like get it perfect again. Cause even with the like exact formula, like, you need multiple batches to like get it perfect to what the original formula is. So just transferring that intellectual property to a manufacturer in the US for some of our goods would take a lot of time. So it takes at least a year to probably pivot our supply chain. And so in the immediate term, we would either have to eat the cost, or we would have to raise the cost of goods, essentially. So it is essentially a tax in the immediate term. Now, what could happen eventually, right, is then it actually ends up hurting Canada, right? Because if it's 25 cents more, 25% more to manufacture in Canada, then I would say, okay, maybe potentially we start importing from another country, or we manufacture in the US. So the theory is that it could kind of bully the other country to do what you want them to do, which is like, what leads to trade wars, and what we're kind of seeing happen, because China has the ability to respond, where, like, Mexico and Canada, because they rely so much on US trade, don't have as much leverage as China does. China doesn't rely that much on US trade. We rely more on importing goods from China than they sort of rely on us. And so in some ways, like, I mean, I don't know really the politics of all this, but it's a little bit harder to go to a trade war with China, just because of like how dependent we are. We saw that during COVID. We were very dependent on them from a supply chain standpoint, and we're dependent on all of our, all our allies and everybody we trade with in some ways. But and we import a lot of like agricultural goods from Mexico, so the cost of food would go up in the immediate term as well. Now, the theory is that those brings jobs to the US, right? Because you're saying, well, okay, it's more expensive to make it in Canada, let's make it in the US. And, then there's going to be no tariff. And so it's cheaper to make, and therefore there's going to be more jobs in the US, right? So in theory, that's how it works, but it would take time for it to catch up. And on the flip side, what you see happen immediately afterwards is China then just put a tariff on US goods. And now they're going after Google for like anti-monopoly and stuff. So like, countries fight back because it has an immediate effect on them, and so it kind of leads into this like spiraling. But the question is, who's got the most leverage, right? But I think the question is like, this is kind of outside of our scope and outside of the politics. And like I said, like, tariffs have been going on forever, and I think now in this current administration, they're being leveraged as more of like a negotiation point. And I think it could spiral horribly out of control, or it could work out in the US favor. I don't know the answer to that. But I think if for the beauty customer and for just the average American who just like the cost of food is already so expensive, my general consensus as a business owner is that in the immediate term, the cost of things, if these tariffs do go into effect, will go up. And then And then what happens year 2 and 3 will depend on how companies respond to those tariffs. Either they pass the price on to you, or they change their manufacturing to bring the cost down low. But what I'll say historically is when the cost of things went up during COVID, they never came back down. And even though the supply chains loosened up, right, because then suddenly things opened up again, everyone was still like, we're keeping the prices where they are, right? So it's kind of like becomes the new normal, right? So, so I do think in the immediate term, cost of goods will go up. Whether or not in the end it's better for Americans, TBD. I think that's for smarter folks than me.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting to being an observer and not an expert in the topic and just someone going through it in life. I do wonder. So just trying to say this logically though, because you're talking about like, well, what are the two outcomes that could be like, because there is a reason, right? Like I was looking back in like the 1990s, the tariffs were something like 30% in China. Like that was extremely high. There has to be a logical reason that this could be beneficial to the person or the country doing it. And so you mentioned one of the two is bringing jobs into the US. And you also mentioned how that is basically practically impossible to happen. I'm totally with you. Like there's like a 0% chance I feel like that happens. And that's going to also lead into like the later conversation in terms of like healthcare, health insurance, like all of these things. Why is it not just expensive, but prohibitively expensive to do any of this in the US? And it goes from the top down. It's like from trading with countries or manufacturing in countries or pharmaceuticals in America. Or why did I fly to Bulgaria? Because somehow it was cheaper to fly me, the film crew, and everybody out there who was involved to another country across the world than to do the same thing here. Like
I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah. So like there's a problem. There is a problem probably that does need to be addressed where again, top down healthcare, it doesn't really matter the industry. Innovation. You want to talk about tech, you want to talk about cars. There's something about doing things in America that makes it the most expensive in the world. And there probably is something that needs to be addressed there that again, it's going to address. And when it's addressed, if it ever is addressed, and I'm not confident it will be, it would have a significant impact on every facet of life.
Yeah, I mean, I think we made decisions a long time ago in this country that we were going to switch from a manufacturing economy to a services economy. And we have become a service and tech and intellectual property and research development based country. And of course, there's still manufacturing jobs. And, I grew up near towns where manufacturing was a very big part of the industry there. But a lot of those plants have closed even since where I grew up, right? Like a lot of those manufacturing facilities have changed and been outsourced to other countries. So because we made these decisions gradually over like 50 years that we were not going to be a manufacturing powerhouse anymore, it's very difficult to bring those jobs back here because it's just the cost of labor is so much higher in the US. Now, you compound this with the fact that we're going to be slowing immigration, it becomes even more difficult to manufacture or farm in the United States, right? So, I mean, I think it's the way this all works together is almost like a butterfly effect of things, right? Because all of these things are interconnected. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of problems in this country, and those problems actually do need to get solved, right? Like we have immense problems that do need to be tackled, right? Like it appears as if there's a tremendous amount of fraud in the government. I think kind of whatever party lines you're on, I think kind of across Democratic, liberal, libertarian, Republican, right, conservative, doesn't matter. I think we can all agree that like if there's fraud or waste in the government, like someone needs to figure out a way to identify it and fix it. Nobody wants our tax dollars being wasted, right? So there's things in this country that need to be fixed. The question I think people always debate is like, what is the best way to accomplish those things, right? To make the country or the country you live in safer. So I don't know the answer. I'm just thinking like, in my very small world, which is just a kind of a fraction of what the world and how these things are affect you are going to be different. But like from beauty consumer, and many of you buy beauty products, that's how I anticipate these tariffs to play out. But I also think that they'll affect food in the temporary term. I think the price of fuel and stuff will go up. But then, I think who knows where we'll go from there. But I think it's going to be interesting to see. It's been kind of a whirlwind the last couple of weeks.
Oh yeah, definitely.
All right, so let's get into, is it true that retinol thins the skin? So this is an article coming out of the Guardian, and no matter how many times I try to go after this myth, it just seems to continuously reemerge. So essentially, like, and it's very much perpetuated by estheticians, and I work with several estheticians. I have tremendous respect for estheticians. I think their skill set is invaluable in the office, and I think derms working with estheticians is like one of the greatest combinations because they bring a completely different skill set in. That being said, I think there must be some education on the esthetician curriculum that teaches that retinol thins the skin. It does not thin the skin. It actually thickens the skin overall, both the epidermal and the dermal layer. It thins out that stratum corneum layer of the skin, which is this part of it's the dead skin cells that like give your skin that like lackluster, dull look. And so you kind of want that layer to be thinner. And so that's what it does. So it does not thin the skin.
Yeah, it's actually kind of weird that this is a myth that sometimes I wonder if this is like a fake myth, but like occasionally I'm just, it's like one of those things like, is anybody really thinking this? Or is it some people we're debunking, people are debunking it just because like to keep the conversation going. Oh, people think this. No, you're crazy. Does anybody really think this? But I do see it occasionally still come up. Like it's always the same group of people who are like, the anti-chemical, like clean everything, like retinol, because it just somehow falls into the unclean beauty product list.
It is interesting. It's like considered like the most unclean ingredient, but like retinoic acid, which is like what retinol converts into in the skin, is like naturally produced by the skin. And in fact, like it's like one of the few ingredients like our body, our like nucleus has like a receptor for, like meaning like it'd be the equivalent of like like going into a house and like it has outlets and like the plugs fit the outlets and being like, oh, I can't believe you brought this like, this lamp here. It doesn't belong here. Like, even though it like plugs perfectly into the outlet, like we literally like our body like naturally makes the receptors for retinoids. Like we are like literally geared to respond to retinoic acid.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't know. It's amazing that this continues to perpetuate, but yeah, our body makes it. It makes the ingredient. It makes the receptors. We are programmed to run off of it. So another thing too, like we say this, and we actually caveated this in our other videos because just watching them back, like not only does it not thin the bulk of the skin, being the epidermis and dermis, that's the vast majority of what our skin is. It may thin the stratum corneum, but it normalizes keratinization. So like whenever we talk about the thinning, we frame this in the same way in another video. It doesn't thin it like the side effect of steroids. Like steroids thinning the skin is bad. It makes it paper thin over a long period of time. That is bad. However, no, that does not occur with retinoids. If it thins out a thick part of your skin, like psoriasis, it doesn't thin it out to where like that top layer is like unhealthy skin. It normalizes it. So like it thins it down to what it should have been if it was in like its pristine state. So yeah, I don't know. It's hard to like sell me on the idea that retinoids in any form are not helpful or beneficial, but this particular idea is just unfounded. And maybe we should get like our hands on an esthetician course itself, because it does live somewhere. Yeah. And I don't know where it started.
We should do more education to like our, kind of like co-education with our esthetician colleagues. All right, let's hop into this next article, because this article is baffling. And I don't know if you had a chance to read through this, Dr. Maxfield, but this is Prospect Medical Holdings files for bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And it's coming out of healthcaredrive.com. I think if anybody has some time, read through this article, you will be flabbergasted. And we've been talking about this for a long time. There is so much abuse in the healthcare system, and everyone thinks like when they get that bill from the doctor, right, they go to the hospital, they get a bill, $15,000. They're like, oh, they didn't do anything for me. And you're like, where is all this money going? And this money is going to the executives, the private equity companies, the hospital administrators, the pharma companies. It is not going to the doctors. It is not going to your nurse. Yeah. It's not going to your tech. That is such a small part of where this medical waste goes. And this article will tell you everything that you need to know about what's happening in the US. And you also will tell you everything you need to know about how unsustainable this is. And if this continues, and I've been saying this for like 2 years, the medical system will collapse in the United States. And we are seeing this happening in real time. So Prospect Medical Holdings is a private equity owned healthcare system. They own 16 hospitals systems in the United States. So they have a massive, I think they're the second largest like hospital system, like between everything that they own. They own like Crozer Health System, which is in Pennsylvania, which, you know, has residency programs. They own hospitals in California, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island. And they essentially have, according to this article, 100,000 creditors that they owe money to. Okay. But the interesting thing about this is like the most disgusting part about this article is like, if you read this section where they say private equity firm Leonard Green and Partners owned Prospect between 2010 and 2021, and after which they sold it. And they basically plundered the healthcare system. So they took control of this healthcare system and all the hospitals and all the patients that they take care of, right? And they paid out 640, and during the 10 years that they owned these hospitals, they paid out $645 million in dividends and stock redemptions to its investors, right? So $645 million of the money that they were bringing into the healthcare system through billing insurance companies went to their investors and to the owners of this private equity firm. Okay. 424 million went directly to the private equity firm. And during this time period, they continue to accrue more and more debt on the goodwill of these hospitals. So they're taking debt on and then passing on profits to their private equity investors. Okay. Then the craziest thing that these guys did was that they sold the land and the facilities that the hospital lived on. Okay. And then they leased it back from the company. Okay. And they did that for like 1.5. They were paying in annual rent, $1 million in like annual rent payments or something like crazy, like per hospital or something like this. Like, so they essentially were like they sold and leased back the properties at like an unsustainable like rent, essentially, that the hospital like could not afford. The hospitals could not afford to like pay. So basically, like they took control of this hospital system and they gutted it for 10 years, right? And then they sold it off to like another private equity firm, essentially. And then now the hospitals are like in complete bankruptcy and ruin, and they owe money to all the debtors, and like all these people got rich doing this, essentially. But nobody wants to buy these hospitals, right? So like they tried to sell Crozer Health System, which like people rely on these hospitals. Like sometimes hospitals are like the only place people get care in, like, you know, a certain area, right? Like emergency medical care, like underserved communities that don't have insurance, right? Like they're sometimes like the safety net for these communities. And now they're essentially bankrupt and could potentially close. And it's all because a bunch of people gutted the system for like all it's worth.
Yeah. So there are 2 points to this, and I think the most interesting thing here is that specifically, because we've talked about this before, where a private equity group, a huge one in the American health system, goes bankrupt. And the question with the first one specifically was like, why is it not sustainable to own medical practices, even as a large multi-million dollar private equity group? This one, more specifically, seems to be a bit of perhaps negligence, ill intent, and I don't know what the definition of fraud when it comes to this sort of thing is, but like there seems to be some sort of nefarious activity of the private equity group itself, which I think is actually quite different than the other one we've talked about. It's tough to know what to make of these things, because obviously what it does is it creates a horrible bind for people who need care. Like if you don't have your health, you have nothing. Like your health is the crown for your life. And as soon as that's gone, like you really realize like very quickly what life is all about. And so when it comes to like,
what's the phrase? It's like, uh, you can have 100 problems.
oh
But
yeah,
if you have like a health problem, you have one problem,
mm-hmm.
essentially. Like, it's like it becomes the priority over all things, right? Like it
Yep.
is like once you lose that, or you're ever in that situation, and you see it, I see it all the time when I was working in the hospital, like where these like kind of life changing medical things happen to people, right?
Yeah.
And it like didn't matter what the plans were. It's like the only problem you have to face. You know, it's kind of crazy, like how fragile life is.
Yeah, it's true. And so like when the health system like is on the verge of collapse, or when something like this is going to leave prospectively, I mean, who knows, countless people without a place to turn. Like, it's difficult. It's extremely difficult. And but the worst part is like, what's the answer? Who knows? But like, the reason I say this was tied to the first conversation is because even though this company perhaps again had done deliberately things wrong, or perhaps morally wrong, legally right, who knows how that works, but there is the reality that healthcare in America is extremely expensive. It is unaffordable. The health insurance is absolutely expensive. And I'm going to share some of my health insurance journeys as owning a practice over the course of this year. I'm going to have some pretty crazy stories for y'all. It'll be interesting what I take public for some of these companies, um, but there is like the way this works, and the way that I can simply put this down is like, if you go to a restaurant, you're just going to like Armando's, you're just going there to buy a burger, and you see Armando behind the register. He's like, "Hey, you want to buy a burger?" I'm like, "Yeah, I want to buy a burger. I'd like that one." He says, "Okay, great." And you're like, "How much does it cost?" He's like, "Well, I don't know. Do you have burger insurance?" Like, "Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I do." "Okay, great." So then you give him the burger, and then he takes your money. I'm not sure how much it's actually going to cost you yet. And then he passes it off to his billing department. His billing department sends it off to another company's billing department. The other company's billing department passes up the food chain. There's also another chef in the other company who's going to review your receipt to make sure it was correct and audited. And then there's another person who's going to make sure that your burger was like made with like cost efficient things. And then all of those jobs, in my opinion, are worthless. They're a waste. They're excess. And so for every interaction you have with your doctor and nurse, because I actually find it pretty reasonable. Like, when I reconstruct someone's nose from a large skin cancer, that's difficult. And if I was going to charge them cash, like whether it's $1,000, $2,000, I think it's actually reasonable to be like, yeah, that like, to rebuild my nose, that sounds kind of fair to pay that much. But that money does not go to that person in the room. There are probably, I would guess, and one day I'm going to follow the money, but I would guess there are 10 to 20 to 30 people making money off of that one interaction you have with your doctor, nurse, whoever. And I think it's absolutely insane. But that's, for me, I think that's just the most obvious reason. The price is so high, but then there's also like technology waste, which we're seeing on a large scale. Like, that also needs to be accounted for. But the private equity, the administrative jobs, there's just so many extra jobs that are created that just drive the cost up to make what the health insurance and health system is just unaffordable, and the quality continues to decline despite the cost continuing to increase. It's crazy.
100%. And I always say this: there's a million, like there's two people in the room that want the same thing. It's the doctor and the patient.
Yeah.
Doctor wants the patient to get better. Patient wants to get better, right? And there are 100 people that stand between that try to literally make that job impossible. And so, yeah, 100%. I mean, they loot. Everybody's looting this industry, and I'm telling you, it is an unsustainable business. So, I think ultimately, like, we'll kind of see like how this all plays out. But to me, this is the tip of the iceberg. This is the second big healthcare system to collapse in the U.S. And you know what? The government will have to bail out this hospital, and so will the surrounding hospitals, because, like, in the end, you cannot have these hospitals collapse. Like, the communities cannot maintain their main source of healthcare and emergency services to collapse, right? So that's the problem with all this, is that in the end, just similar to what happened in 2008 during the financial crisis, there were a couple, and that's another much more complicated like scenario, but like a couple of companies like essentially looted the American people. And in the end, because these services were so critical to the continued sustenance of the American people, the government essentially came in and bailed out these big companies, right? So like the quote unquote, like, too big to fail is essentially what happens in these scenarios. Now, will anybody get in trouble for this? Like, who knows? But all I know is there's a bunch of rich people and private equity that gutted the healthcare system. And in the end, they'll probably get bailed out, because in the end, like, healthcare is needed, right? So that's the problem, is like, is healthcare a right? Is it something that should be universal in the US? Should it be a free market economy? Should it be something the government steps in on? I've always felt strongly that it needs to be one or the other. It needs to be either completely free market, or it needs to be completely government controlled, and you can't have a double, like a two system. That right now we have a system where it's like partly government controlled and it's partly not. And I think when you exist in two worlds, you kind of do worse at both. And I don't know which system is better, either government controlled or fully free market. I don't know the answer to that question. But I think it needs to be one or the other. I think we need to commit. But I think if it continues the way that it is, I think we're going to see like worsening collapses of healthcare systems. And I think more and more frustrated patients. Like, my employees are like, oh, health insurance is not good. I'm like, it's the best plan that
Yeah,
was
exactly.
literally available. Like, we pay the highest rate we can find for our employees.
We do
the
too.
plan is still not good.
Yep.
So it's like, there's nothing like we can do. Like, we're kind of like helpless. And I was seeing people push back against this, and, the way that some people deal with it is not the right way, obviously. But it's just a representation of the frustration, right, that most Americans are experiencing. So anyway, that's my whole soapbox for today. We will be back next week with another episode. I think we're going to be doing a deep dive on a particular medical topic, and Dr. Maxfield and I will debate the literature on it and try to make up the best decision there.
Yep. So that'll be fun. Engage the brains. It's always a good activity. Can't wait for it. And thank you all for being a part of this. Hopefully you get to watch this, listen to it. We're going to be putting these on YouTube as well. So if you want to watch there, you can. But yeah, thank you all. Appreciate everyone's time with us.
All right. We'll see you all next week.
See you next time.